It's a FromSoft tradition that each game's DLC is generally the best part of the game. The only exception to this rule is Sekiro, but even then, Sekiro got patched a boss rush mode with new mechanics that was free and amazing. I'm happy to say that Elden Ring is no different. So to give a spoiler-free summary, the DLC is a more compact version of the base game. It captures the exploration and piecing together of the world that made Elden Ring so special, and even improves upon the gameplay with a higher density of unique and challenging bosses. If you liked the base game, the DLC is amazing and you should get it immediately. If you didn't like the base game, you'll probably not like the DLC, unless the only thing you didn't like about the base game was the amount of repeat bosses. From here on out, we'll be getting into spoilers, and I want to talk about the story, world, and gameplay.
Touch the withered arm, and you too will be transported.
Let's start with the story, as this has been one of the most controversial bits of the DLC from what I've seen. The main criticism I see is that the DLC lacks finality. A lot have said that it's underwhelming to conclude the story of Elden Ring with the repeat boss of Radahn. Honestly, if this were the end, I would agree. But I don't think this is the case. As far as I understand, the final boss of Elden Ring is still Radagon and the Elden Beast. While this DLC did come out after, it's not a sequel. It's an optional journey that lets us flesh out the stories of some of the best characters in the base game. Marika, Miquella, Mohg, Radahn, Malenia, and more. Viewing it in that light, it amplifies the base game so much more. Learning about the shaman's torture at the hands of the Hornset in Marika's home village almost justifies her hatred towards the Land of Shadow. Seeing the minor Erdtree she left behind is the first time she's ever felt like an empathetic character. Mohg beating the allegations 2 years later was a huge surprise, but a cool revelation. Meeting Saint Trina, which is just Miquella's discarded love, draws parallels between Miquella and Marika, and also helps to understand how Marika and Radagon were the same person. Explaining why exactly Malenia would march all the way south from the Erdtree to Caelid, as she had to fulfill the vow between Radahn and Miquella. These are all great story moments, and I've not even mentioned the new NPC storylines. They're all interwoven really well, and Sir Ansbach became one of my favorite FromSoft NPCs in just a brief amount of time. None of this is to say there aren't problems. The best pro of the DLC is that it fleshes out the characters of the base game more, but I do wish the game accounted for this. Finishing the base game after beating the DLC offers no new cutscenes or dialogue options, even with the new knowledge our characters had. It's a missed opportunity, and one that FromSoft has gotten right before. Back when Artorias of the Abyss came out, you could get a unique cutscene during the Sif boss fight, as he recognized you from your actions in the DLC. I think even just a small interaction like that could have gone a long way. Regardless, I'm still quite positive about the story. Just keep in mind, this is not meant to be a new conclusion to Elden Ring. This is an opportunity to take a deep dive into a lot of the already established characters, and in that way I think it succeeds quite a bit. Let's take a look at world design. Honestly, there's almost nothing negative to say. One of the best moments in the base game was seeing the plateau above Liurnia of the Lakes, trying for hours to get up there, then finally arriving 50 hours later in Ranni's quest. The Land of Shadow captures this same moment time and time again. Taking a ladder down in the Shadow Keep, then following a path that led me down some catacombs, which then opened up to the Abyssal Woods, a horror-type zone with incredible atmosphere. Entering the Dragon Pit, and seeing that the dungeon didn't just end, but a door opened up to a giant mountain, which not only led to one of the best dragon bosses the series has seen since Midir, but also one of the most beautiful zones with Cerulean Coast, not to mention the fissure at the far south. Or getting to Raw Base. I followed a path on the east end of the map and somehow ended up in a whole new zone that stayed undiscovered for most of the playthrough. The map, while looking small, is deceptively large and very well vertically layered. My entire playthrough, I was just trying to map out how I would reach certain parts of the map. Then, I was surprised when my planning brought me to a fully different location. That's a lot of praise, but it's not entirely without fault. While the visuals of the zones are amazing, oftentimes there are no reasons to get off torrent and explore. For the most part, I would just sprint past most enemies until I found the next boss, jail, or catacombs. And while some of the open world bosses were new, repeats like the dragons and deathbirds just didn't feel worth my time to fight, and I was already burned out on them from the base game. Lastly, while I love the reveal of the Abyssal Woods and the sense of fear I felt when Torrent wouldn't summon, the zone itself was just annoying to traverse. When I first got to the zone, I walked for a few minutes to get to the church, which was a dead end. Then I walked for a few minutes back to the entrance. Then I got to the stealth section, which I really did enjoy, but beyond the stealth section, it was just an annoying walk. When I did reach the boss and dungeon at the end, I loved it. I thought they were amazing. I just wish that the path there was a little less tedious. I would have been okay with this zone being a more linear stealth section and just capitalized on the amazing horror intro it had. Overall, though, I did enjoy the map design. Piecing the world together was amazing, and visually each zone was stunning. But the zones still face some of the same issues as the base game. Most enemies aren't worth your time, and even many of the open world bosses are repeats. However, this is helped by the zones just being smaller and more dense than the base game. Lastly, I want to take a look at the gameplay. Before we get into bosses, let's look at the new stuff added for the player. The DLC added 8 new weapon types, and some like martial arts, light grade swords, and reversed hand blades are instant classics in my eyes. These add a lot of replayability to New Game Plus and PvP, and there's really nothing much more to say. I'm just very happy to see new playstyles added to the game. Bosses are interesting. Obviously, there are tons of videos out there saying the DLC is too hard, or good difficulty, and some that even say it's too easy, although I'd argue they're just saying that to piss off the crowd that's saying it's too hard. For me, I felt almost an inverse difficulty curve. While Radon feels like, mechanically and tuning-wise, the hardest boss, I definitely struggled more on the Dancing Lion and Rowana. This could be a few things. When I fought the early bosses, I didn't have many Skater Tree fragments, but I was also just coming off of a 2-year break since playing the game at launch. By the time I got to the later bosses like Mesmer, Bale, Midra, and Radon, I'd collected enough fragments to average out the scaling, and I was also just playing a lot better as I'd got back into my groove. This is the trend I noticed. A lot of the people saying that the DLC were too hard were going off of the impressions that the first few bosses left. Honestly, if I were to review at that time, I probably would have agreed too. But having finished the DLC, and as a melee-only solo no summons build nonetheless, I'm happy to say that the difficulty is more than fair. In fact, the DLC is some of the best bosses I've ever seen in Souls. Bale's gotta be one of the best dragons I've ever fought in a video game. Midra was just visually stunning and mechanically super fun, and obviously, Radon is a capstone to all things Souls. Now once again I need to give some criticism. There were some stinkers. I think Gaius is just a bad fight. The hitboxes felt a little wonky. I get the vibe they wanted it to be a mounted fight, but the game just has such a limited moveset on Torrent that it doesn't work out. I think the Hippo is an okay boss, but its bite attack literally clips into the floor and it just looks a little weird. And Mater felt underwhelming. For a boss with such a lore significance to the Greater Will, I felt it needed a cutscene or something, and honestly, it was one of the most mechanically disappointing bosses. It reminded me almost of the one Reborn from Bloodborne. It even looked similar. It looked insane visually, but it was just disappointing mechanically and lore-wise. Overall, though, the combat changes and the boss design in the DLC were top-notch. My advice to anybody struggling with the difficulty, feel free to explore. The DLC is balanced around the new Skater Tree scaling system, and it makes a world of difference. Please don't miss out on these bosses. You owe it to yourself to try some of the best bosses that FromSoft has ever designed. And that's everything. The DLC is great. A lot of reviewers have said that it's just more Elden Ring, but I think it's better than that. It's a more focused Elden Ring experience. It fleshes out characters in a way that makes the base game even better. And while I think certain design elements of the map could be improved, and I wish there were some unique lore interactions beyond the DLC, I think that that's just asking too much already. Even at $40, this DLC feels on sale, and I can highly, highly recommend it. And that's everything. This ending portion is a bit unscripted. Really, I just want to thank everyone. This DLC was so amazing, it kind of re-inspired me to try to make a video. I thought that my first video 2 years ago doing good was a fluke, and seeing the positive reception to the Radon video was just amazing. It really did motivate me to try something new and make a new video, so I want to thank everybody for watching this, however many do, and just know that I really do appreciate it, and I'll do my best to keep delivering what I think is quality content. I don't think I'll stick to just Elden Ring. I do play a lot of other games, and if my type of talking head or my type of way of describing or dishing out information is interesting, then I'll happily keep sharing it. Thank you guys so much. Please let me know what you think in the comments.